Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode of Eggs. Today our special guest is Bill Colleti. Bill is a reputation management, crisis communications, and professional development expert. He is the author of Critical Moments, The New Mindset of Reputation Management. He has more than 25 years of global experience managing high-stakes crises, issued management, and media relation challenges for both Fortune 500 companies and winning global political campaigns. So without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Bill Colleti.
Hey, Bill, how are you? Thanks so much for coming to the show. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, guys, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me.
And but before we get into the conversation, I think we need to point out your backdrop with the palm trees. You're on vacation right now and out of the studio, so we'll let that kind of pass. If you're watching the video,
I'm going to do my own talk show. You know, between two palms. I think somebody might have come up with something similar to that already, but I'll do it between two palms.
So. I love it. Yeah, no, it's funny because I'm down in Salt Lake right now. Mike's up in Pocatello ever since COVID broke out. And so we're doing the show remotely ourselves. But I was just out. I met my family for lunch between shows today, and had spotted a bunch of new snow on the mountaintops here.
Oh, great!
So hopefully, wherever you are, it's much warmer than it is here.
It's a beautiful, windy beach day. Getting ready, trying to go kiteboarding this evening. So it should be good times.
That's awesome.
Bill, you are the author of Critical Moments. It's an awesome book. I'm about halfway through it. Sorry, I didn't get to finish the whole thing. But before we dive into the book and what you do, can you give us kind of a brief overview on your work history, how you got involved in your consultancy?
Yeah, so we have a firm. I started a firm about 6 years ago called Kith, Kith, and the source of the word comes from in Old English literature. There's a concept of I'm going to go visit my kith and my kin. In English, in American English, we use the word kin to talk about our family and who we know as our kinfolk. But our kith are the original people that taught you sophisticated habits. So think about those, the kind of the original gang you hung out with in high school or college, that, National Honor Society, or try out for the football team, or smoke under the bleachers, whatever sophisticated habit somebody tried to teach you or learn to play the guitar. That's kind of that original crowd. And that is what kith is. And so we are a crisis communications and reputation management firm working really with corporations and high net worth individuals that find themselves at the intersection of their activities and public expectations. And so for me in my career, grew up running political campaigns the first half of my career, and then have done partisan political campaigns. And then the second half, this half, doing it for corporations. So running campaigns for corporations. And now specifically, we do it in a crisis and a reputation management context.
Yeah, it's such an interesting idea. Yeah, this whole concept of reputation management is really intriguing to me. I run a marketing and advertising agency, and so we spend a lot of time on just the sort of outward-facing marketing and things like that. We don't spend a lot of time doing reputation management in the sense that we're not managing, out of a crisis. Mm-hmm. Now we do spend a lot of time building reputation and doing that kind of stuff, but the specific focus on the, overcoming crisis or overcoming bad news story or bad storm or global pandemic, maybe.
Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting space.
All of those are exactly what we're talking about. Yep.
So Ryan kind of focuses more on someone's brand, whereas you kind of focus more on the reputation. Would you mind kind of giving us a breakdown on the difference between the two?
Yeah, great concept. And so the definition, there's a lot of definitions, but there's a definition that I've coined is that a company owns its brand, but the public owns their reputation. And so Ryan, and the great work that he does, there are levers and throttles that he can control. He can increase an ad spend. A company, Apple can change the user experience in a store, a grocery store, can do promotions or sales, whatever the case may be. So there are levers that a company can do to control their brand, but it's the public. And so when we think about BP, or we think about Wells Fargo, or we think about PG&E as big Southern, companies out in California, big electrical companies, it is the non-customer's perception of what they do and how they do it that impacts their reputation. And so brand is all about the buyer of the good or service becoming fond of that and buying more of the product. In the case of BP, they would have a really difficult time because of the Deepwater Horizon accident, a really difficult time building a new plant in Louisiana. And that's because of their reputation. That's not because of their brand. I don't buy BP gas just because it's not convenient for me. Okay, the other store is a little bit more convenient. So I'm not a customer of theirs, but I have a strong belief that given the choice between an Exxon plant and a BP plant, that regulators and me as the public, we'd rather have the Exxon plant than the BP plant. So that's that license to operate. So the public owns your reputation. A company owns its brand is the simple definition. There's a couple others we can talk about, but that's, love to get your reaction to that, but that's sort of the foundational component of what we do.
Yeah, I think that's a great like sort of delineation or a good way of defining it, because I think it could be easily construed or difficult to understand the difference between the two. So I think it's great because they're both sort of intrinsically entwined. I mean, they're both part of the same thing, but maybe two sides of the same business coin, maybe.
It's like sales and marketing. What's the difference between sales and marketing? And there's a lot of similarities between the two things, and they're very interdependent upon each other. So I think that, Brian, I think that's what you're saying is they're very, brand and reputation are very interdependent, just like sales and marketing. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. Well, and so maybe I'm trying to think of the best way to start, but maybe let's just get a little bit more background on like how you got into doing this. Like, as a young person, you probably didn't say, "Oh, I'd love to be a reputation management guy." So at what point in your career did you pivot into this consultancy and decide that this is what you're doing? Was it an experience with a client or something that took you down this road?
Yeah. So it was, I guess it's a multi-layer is that there's a great book called Halftime. And so I feel like I have a halftime in my career. As I mentioned earlier, first part of my career was running political campaigns. And that is really what I wanted to do. I was really good at it. Did student government, all that nerdy stuff way back in high school and college. And then that transformed in my first political experience of running campaigns and was really good at that. Ran some national races overseas, ran some races here in U.S. Senate races. And so the pivot was that we've decided that there was a marketplace need for people that could run campaigns for corporations using the same skill sets of political campaigns, of messaging, of 50% plus one, of effective, appropriate grassroots. It really wasn't social as much in those days, but there was the early days of the web. How do you leverage all of that? So how do you take those same skill sets into a Coke versus Pepsi fight, for example? Or typically, a lot of the early work was aviation, getting Southwest Airlines the ability to go into markets. And so there's so many protectionist legislation that kept Southwest from serving you guys, from serving those markets, and I'm sure you're customers of Southwest, is that they couldn't fly there. And so that was a campaign to win the public so that they could actually have a brand and sell tickets. But they needed to win the public about freedom of access. So the pivot point for me was this aha moment in a company that was innovating it based in Austin, that was saying, we can do what we do for candidates, but we can take that same mindset and same behavior and bring that to corporations. And it really remade the industry, created what was called the public affairs industry. Different than lobbying. That was, everybody knew how you could do lobbying, but this was a different concept.
Okay. So when you approach a company or they come to you and know that they have a problem, how do you go apart and figure out exactly what the problem is? In your book, you had a case study with Chipotle, how they, they thought one thing, but really it was something way deeper down. How do you define what the problem is in a company?
Yeah, awesome question. It's difficult. So we are just Friday signed up a new client. And so we are off to the races, started at 9 a.m. Monday morning, as well as a conference call on Saturday. And I'm just now, we're 4 days into it. I am just now getting to the root of the matter. I'm just now figuring out what the problem is. I wish I love models and processes. It is difficult. It's a conversation to get to the root of the question, to really understand what is the business objective. I think for me, what I've really sort of figured out is in a crisis, a true event where speed is the clear differentiator, is there's a basic model. There's mission and values. What do you stand for as an organization? You add that with chain of command, and then the sum of those two things equals speed. So what I really try to figure out at the outset is, what do these guys stand for? I mean, are they good people or bad people? I try to figure that out before I even get hired. Are they good people or bad people? Because there's plenty of bad people out there, and there's plenty of really good companies that people perceive to be bad. So there's no formal process, but it's I like to question or interrogate. We ask a ton of questions at the outset to really understand business strategy, but it all roots into that mission and values. If your company can't articulate its mission and values, you know you're going to have a harder time getting to the bottom of what the problem is.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
That's why Starbucks and Apple and sort of these high reputation firms do really well. They're really crystal clear on what they want to try to accomplish. And they have little bumps in the road, but they're not devastating. Other companies don't really know what they stand for other than greater shareholder value or making a bunch of money, and it doesn't really work.
Well, I guess it makes sense, right? I mean, if you have a topographical map of your company, I mean, if you don't have some understanding of where you're headed, or what it is you hope to accomplish, whether it's in business or whatever your goals are, it is really difficult to understand where you're headed. So I think,
and what do you stand? Yeah, what do you stand for? And so right now in real time, we've got almost all of our clients. A couple of them got out of it pretty quickly. One was pandemic. How are you going to deal with the significant economic impact that's going to happen of having to lay off customers, of not being in business, not making money the way you had done, and not executing your strategy the way you thought you were on January 1st of 2020. And now Black Lives Matter. Is Black Lives Matter a political agenda? Is Black Lives Matter simply a hashtag? Can I use the hashtag? Can I not use the hashtag? Do I understand what racial bias is? Am I racist? Lots of companies are struggling with that. And the ones that are good at it are ones that have some sort of home base of mission and values. And we all roll our eyes at mission statement sessions, and we've all sat through all that BS, but it really matters to know what you stand for.
Yeah, it's not unlike you as a human being, right? I mean, having some sort of core understanding of who you are and, what it is that makes you tick, whether it is Black Lives Matter or any number of other things, day to day, we make decisions based on some set of ground rules that exist within us. And Absolutely. for your as a company, to think of your company as a living, breathing entity, it's also important for them.
Well, even
Absolutely.
with like the Black Lives Matter moment that's going on right now, if your company has been the antithesis or the opposite of that, and all of a sudden you jump on the bandwagon and start posting about it, people are going to know. They're going to be able to see right through that. So it's actually kind of like you have to be doing it and living it and following those principles from the start. And, in a crisis situation like this, how would a company be able to kind of like say the right thing and know that they're saying the right thing without shooting themselves in the foot? If, for example, with the Black Lives Matter thing.
I mean, just to sort of elaborate on that thought, it's even, you've seen so many of these things, right? I mean, every CEO of every company has sent out an email at this point and all that stuff. And you can feel the ones that are flopping versus the ones that are, coming from a place of authenticity.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely. And I suggest, or I would believe that this is, more tightly understood by each company based on their sort of core ethic.
Yeah. So this has been 2020 has been this year of superlatives. So we've all said the pandemic was unprecedented. And we all said that it's forcing us to rethink our fundamental business model, regardless of what the topic is. We now are following up with this moment that we're in relative to, race and the notion of police brutality and those, all of those issues. Is that there was a standard practice that I subscribed to, is that to avoid those foot faults that both of you just described, to avoid those foot faults is that if you're not crystal clear on your mission and values, it's best just to say nothing, because you're going to screw it up. You're going to say something ham-handed, inauthentic, and hollow, and you're going to get tagged. In this year of superlatives, it is changing so fast that people are getting called out where saying nothing was actually safe harbor. It's no longer safe harbor anymore. Companies are getting called out. And so to just be a Johnny come lately and said, look at me, we're not racist, we've got a black receptionist. People are just flipping out about that. And so what is morphing into the answer is, you're right. We hadn't thought about it that way, and we need to do something about that. So it's not a solution. Back to Deepwater Horizon. We're not going to plug the well and you're going to think good of us. We don't know how to plug the well, and we're going to go to figure it out. So please help us help you to figure out how to do it. That is becoming a more typical response, unless, surprisingly, in 2020, a lot of big companies haven't even really thought about this stuff because they thought they were so unracist. By default, they became racist.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up that approach, because acknowledging that you have faults goes a long way in the repair process.
And in human relationships, it goes a long way.
Oh yeah, it really does. In your book, you talk about the 4 A's of reputation excellence. You kind of want to break that down for us and give us an overview of that.
So it was interesting. So I just started our firm, and I had finishing an engagement in New York. Had a client was in a relatively big data breach, and we had this 4 days of just kerfluffle. We didn't really know what we had lost, and so we were in a big mess. Female CEO, really super sharp, great dynamic, understood both her business, but also understood the public's expectations around a data breach and the fear that comes from a data breach. And I, being a good consultant, was trying to articulate reputation management. And I hadn't really coined company owns its brand and the public owns its reputation yet. And I was sort of fumbling around with this jargon and fumbling around with these words to say, okay, we've been through this data breach crisis. We now need to transform and go on a reputation management journey so that the next time it comes, it's not as debilitating. And she goes, yeah, that's awesome. But tell me more about that. And I kept on fumbling and bumbling around to try to explain it like a good consultant. And I couldn't. So finally she said, come back to me. And what I'm looking for is something like I learned in grad school about the 4 P's of marketing. Price. So Ryan, I'm sure you know it. Price, product, place, promotion. It's a 1960s. It's incredibly old fashioned. But if you think about it, price, product, place, promotion still works, even in the age of digital. So the 4 P's still work. And so she said, come back to me with a model like that. So that night, literally on a Delta Airline cocktail napkin, I sort of mapped out this notion of what I mean about the 4 A's of reputation management. And they stack together, as you'll see on the cover of the book, they stack together in a pyramid. It's awareness, assessment, authority, and then action. And we can unpack them each one if you want to talk about them. But a couple of nuances is that they also fit the desire for human growth and human development as well. And so the first thing is about awareness. What am I? Who am I as a company? What do I stand for? What do I believe in? Who am I? Who are we as an entity? What business lines are we in? So a lot of corporations, we were just talking about this, aren't really aware. So it begins with this notion of awareness. Then is assessment. Asking the people that matter to you, what do you expect of us? This is not magic. And Ryan, I'm sure you know this in marketing. You can go ask customers, what do you want me to do? And as long as we meet your expectations with a little bit of innovation every now and then, people are pretty happy. That we don't have to, find the Rosetta Stone in marketing. And so that's what assessment is let's just ask people, what do you expect of us reputationally? Don't pollute the environment. Don't be a pig. Don't be a racist. Don't be a misogynist. Ask those and get some real understanding of what do you expect from us. Then the 4 A's go to this notion of authority. I'm aware of who we are. I've asked our stakeholders what we need to do. Can we go to our senior leadership team and get the authority to actually execute it? Can we actually do this? Can we walk this walk? Because I've seen so many good reputation management programs die because CEOs and leaders aren't committed to them. And so that's why the third layer is authority. And a lost feature in the 4 A's is above authority is a solid blue line on the cover of the book. And that solid blue line is kind of this membrane to keep consultants like me and Ryan from just immediately running to action with all of these great ideas. You need to write a check to the United Way. You need to support Little League basketball. And we jump to this action. So there's this intentional membrane there that says, don't do that. Be aware, go ask people, and make sure your leadership can actually walk the walk. Then you can move to action. And action is the final step. And that's what we talk about in the context of leadership marketing. That's what a company can do to sort of build and grow its reputation for the long term.
Well, for those of you that are watching the video, here's the book, and you can see that actual break in the pyramid that he's going there. So I like that you pointed that out.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you real quick. So it seems to me that in a process like this, most people, and maybe I've got this wrong. This is just me making a generalization, but my assumption is that most people start looking for you after something's already wrong. And so we may sort of sometimes bypass this idea of the old scout oath, of being prepared. And so I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about this process as people come in, because I would imagine typically they engage you when they're already in crisis. And then, it's only afterwards that you start being prepared for future ones. And so I wondered if you'd just talk a little bit about the process, what it looks like when somebody comes to you, and then, what that engagement looks like. So they jump in, mid crisis or wherever they actually engage. Yeah,
great point. And the answer is yes. I mean, so by revenue, 75% of our firm's revenue is crisis response. And when your hair's on fire or your house is on fire, you do not want me to pull out a triangle and talk to you about the 4 A's of reputation. that is not the conversation that people want to have. And so when I think about that, and you're right on, is that my older brother is a little bit overweight. He went to go see his cardiologist, and he said, "You're fat and your heart's not working. You gotta do something about that, and you gotta go diet and exercise." And so he went home and started walking 5 miles a day, but ate like crap and didn't change anything. He went back to the doctor. You can just imagine what the answer was. It says, "Okay, you're walking, a little bit, but you still have the underlying problem." And so when I take that's a crisis for him. He had a crisis. What we've articulated is there's two aspects that the 4 A's fit within is that after the crisis, when people then become very conscious about needing their reputation, after my brother's he got very conscious about resiliency, is that there's two arcs. There's crisis readiness, which is the basic blocking and tackling of how you respond in a crisis. That's spokespeople. Are we aligned on our mission and values? What do we stand for? Just the basic building blocks of what I've done for my whole career of, are you ready? So that's crisis readiness. Diet. Risk awareness, which is the bottom track, which is the exercise. And they only work when they go together. So we talk about risk awareness. What are the risks that are inherent to your company, both societal risk, company risks, business risks that are unique to what you do, as well as others in your industry? And what can you do, A, to understand them so that you're better prepared when they happen? And then B, what can you begin to do to start mitigating those risks and having fewer of them? That's the exercise component. So diet, crisis readiness, exercise, risk awareness, that then transformed my brother into being more resilient, but that also then transforms corporations into being more reputationally resilient by following those two tracks. And we break them down into the 4 A's, but the two tracks of crisis readiness, basic building blocks, basic blocking and tackling, compared with or along with risk understanding, so you can mitigate and then begin to sort of understand the things that can blow you up.
Well, so to take that metaphor of using, sort of the human body as a model, if somebody comes to you basically after the heart attack and they're on the slab, is that when you bring somebody, do you guys engage with somebody that's that far gone, or do you do some sort of assessment to understand, yes, this was you had a minor heart attack, but you could still live a great life if you make these changes?
Totally. It's much more the latter. Yeah. Very, very few people are so devastated. I'm not who they're calling. They're calling a bankruptcy attorney. At that point, they're not calling me. These are people that had a data breach as a perfect example, had a sexual harassment challenge that they're going through, had a competitor that really went hammer and tong at them and they need to rebuild because of that. It's maybe a little more than minor heart attack. But it's also corporations that just say, hey, again, back to this human metaphor, I'm 50, 60 years old. I should probably get my heart checked out. I should probably look at what I got. And I probably need to change my diet and exercise because I'm now 50. So there's some proactive companies like that.
Okay, so that leads me kind of into this next thought, which is, this sort of assessment step, like knowing that we have a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so again, just sticking with this, human metaphor, a lot of times we don't know we have a problem until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we recognize we're carrying a little extra weight or whatever it is, but you kind of don't need to do anything about it until you need to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty easy to go the other way. So how do you, is there such a thing as an engagement where you get involved early enough where you're helping your customers, I guess sort of recognize that the potential for issue down the road, but you're capable of sort of helping them do this assessment step? I guess what I'm really interested in is trying to understand how one might assess their situation to understand if they're indeed at risk.
Yeah. So again, the at risk is, I think there's two components. Are we crisis ready? Is spokesperson Bob ready for this when this happens? And is our general counsel ready for this? And then are we aware of all of these different risks that are there? So yeah, we view it we do it early on. We do it in the awareness phase. We've got a couple of online tools for some self-diagnostics. You can take these 21 questions and it'll give you a score. And that score will relate to, how you compared to a data set, depending upon the industry of other companies like yourself or everybody that's taken it. And you can actually get a real number about your crisis readiness. So it asks a number of basic blocking and tackling. It's all rooted on 7 key components that we found are really critical for organizations that do this really well. So yeah, we can come in really fast, do a quick assessment. We form a hypothesis really quick that all forms from that experience that we have and say, company, here's what we see. I mean, we can do it in a handful of conference calls. We can do it with this diagnostic. And just by asking good questions, we can see you're ready or you're not ready. And there are things that I'm looking for. But yeah, we can give a relatively quick, efficient diagnostic assessment. But we do it, this is where the A's get confusing. We do it at the very outset, where we're becoming aware. Because our assessment is asking other people. It's done in awareness where you're kind of asking yourself. And Ryan, that's the point. You're asking yourself, can I really, how do I get better?
Yeah. So when you get to that point of awareness and you're aware you have a problem, you're aware that you need to do something about it, you get your assessment from you and you have the consultant. At some point, you have to start moving in the next direction up. And in chapter 2 of your book, you actually talk about growing your reputation and getting credit for it without coming across wrong. How can a business who wants to change their reputation make that first step forward? And what's a path usually look like for them?
Yeah, it's very custom. It's very bespoke. I think that's when we get into trouble of where everybody writes a check to their favorite LGBTQ cause, or they write their check to every, in this moment, to everybody that talks about the issues of race. That's when companies get into trouble. So it's very customized, it's very bespoke, and it's really related to the risks. All right. So we have these societal risks, and we talked about it earlier. This race issue has become a societal risk for corporations. It's also become a moral imperative. So I don't want to talk about it just in a cold corporate context. I think companies have to have an opinion on this, but let's talk about it as a risk. There are these societal risks. Once we go through this journey, we then start mapping out that says, you are a major manufacturer of, oil and gas product, or you are a major credit card company and you hold a lot of personally identifiable information, or you're a casino and you're going to have people coming back to your gaming floor in the aspects of COVID.
Yeah.
Those are all things that we can talk about. And to grow your reputation, it's evangelizing the threat. Here's what we're fixing. Here's what we're concerned about. Here's where we ultimately want to be. The end state is that we just want to maintain our license to operate. We want to run our business the way we want to run our business without the interruption or without the disruption of a crisis. So we walk through that journey with a company of, is spokesperson Bob ready? And are the risks, do we know what our risks are, and can we do something to prepare for them? So the way you grow your reputation is by understanding what people expect of you and give it to them, and making sure that you're in it for the long term, which is the authority part. Are we really, really, really ready to walk this walk? And that's where we're seeing people struggle right now in understanding inherent racial bias. They're ready to do lip service, but they're not ready to do the walk.
Is that something where you would almost go back and do a complete overhaul of your business and say, hey, this is our updated mission statement. This is our core values. This is what we stand for now.
Yeah,
okay.
Potentially. And also we need to go talk to the board, because we are just giving it lip service, and we really have to do something better. And that might end, with a revised mission statement. If you're a target corporation, it might end is that we're going to stop doing business with Bangladesh because the kids that are sewing they're using kids to sew our shirts together. And that's not a good thing. We shouldn't be supporting of that. So it's very, very comprehensive in the way we think about it. But we try to make it bite-sized for people.
So one thing that you started to kind of touch on a little bit there, and we've touched on a little bit throughout this conversation, but it's something I think we should maybe discuss at a little greater depth, or at least it's a topic that's interesting to me, is this risk framework that you bring up in the book. Mm-hmm. You talk about there's 3 different kinds of risk: preventable, strategic, and external. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about each of these different types of risk, and presumably these weigh in on that self-assessment category. You're looking for these kinds of risks.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about these 3 categories and just sort of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, awesome. That's all that really underpins that risk track, that exercise component that we're thinking about. So 3 basic types of risk. And this came from reforms out of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when big banks were looking at their risk profiles. 3 different types of risks: strategic, preventable, and external. Strategic are risks that you undertake to achieve superior strategic value. You mean to use red dye number 5 in the cherries. You chose to do that. All right. You intended to clear cut a forest because there was superior economic value for that. So that's what a strategic risk is. There are things that you do that you have done very intentionally. And so in risks like that, hopefully, not always the case, smart people have sat around the table that said, okay, people might get upset or confused when they find out that we've done this. What are we going to do about it? Because we do believe it's safe. We do believe it's right. We do believe it's correct. So that's what a strategic risk is. That then dictates a different type of response when the public actually draws into question. And so too often we see companies putting their head in the sand and say, we're going to use red dye number 5. People are confused about red dye number 5. And so we're just going to hope nobody finds out. And that's a horrible way to manage it. The way you need to think about it is that I'm sorry that you didn't do a good enough job explaining it. Let me explain it to you. So strategic risks, things you meant to do. Preventable risks, simply zero tolerance. There should not be metal shavings in hamburger patties. That simply should not happen. And with the right technology and with the right X-ray machine or magnets and tools, it is absolutely possible for you to have a zero tolerance of metal shavings in hamburger patties made at an industrial scale. And so preventable risks are risks that simply should not happen. The risk thinking takes preventable in the construct of infinite resources and infinite rules. Now, we don't have infinite resources and we can't impose infinite rules on our teams. So, but the public has a belief is that you both nodded your head. There should not be metal shavings in our hamburger patties. You simply there's no threshold where you're like, I get it. I'm going to cut them some slack. That probably shouldn't be there. And that just doesn't happen. So that's preventable risk. And you should do everything you do to avoid it. And you don't try to explain it. You don't try to defend it. You apologize and fix it. That's what you do with preventable risks. And then there's external. So external is that they're outside of your control. That's sort of force majeure. Issues related to crime. Active shooter probably fits out there. Some could argue that an active shooter on a campus or something like that is preventable. I don't agree with that because we're not going to lock down campuses, in that infinite mentality and magnetometers at every door. So I view them as an external risk. The reality of external risks from a crisis response and a messaging standpoint is that you're typically in the herd. So if a hurricane hits, and I'm here on the Texas coast today, if a hurricane hits the Texas coast, it's not just Walmart, but it's Home Depot and Target and the H-E-B and the Safeway that are all getting impacted. And so what people want to know is they will cut you slack in external risks. They just want to know, is everything okay? And when are you going to get back to normal? And so the reason we go through this exercise of identifying your risks is because, one, we need to figure out what they are so we can mitigate them, but also then it really ramps up your response. If we're not debating the basic threshold question, are we apologizing or are we explaining? If we know what the risk is, you don't have a debate about whether we're apologizing or explaining. If it's strategic, in theory, smart people thought about it and you should be explaining.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Do you have any case studies of, you mentioned a bunch of them in the book, but I know you probably can't talk about specific clients you've worked with, but do you have any that maybe have followed the 4As and have had a good outcome because they did, that you could kind of just break down the minutia for us?
Yeah, really clear, Cargill. So Cargill is a huge multinational protein and agricultural company. We work specifically for their meat processing business, particularly beef processing. They had a product called finely textured beef, or you might remember it as pink slime, if you remember that from back in the day, 2014. And so we took them on this journey of bringing, and pink slime it's a very, very, it's been beat up in the marketplace, but the process of finely textured beef, is a very safe and highly efficient in a resource-starved world. It is a great way to extract an extra 20%, out of a beef cow that typically would get lost or thrown away or destroyed, or potentially used in dog food. But we walked them through this process of being aware. People are grossed out by pink slime. So let's start by being aware and understanding that and stop deluding ourselves. People think this is gross. What do people want? And so we went through a research journey where we asked both grocery stores, who are the main purchaser of this product. We asked grocery stores, we asked the public, we asked regulators, we asked lots of different people. Tell us about, if we could bring this product back, what would be the key features and benefits of this product that would make it work for you? A lot of grocery store chains, particularly in middle America, and I've, you guys may have done it, you see these big 5-pound chubs of ground beef. I typically don't buy those unless I'm doing a Boy Scout cookout. That's when I buy them. A Boy Scout cookout for big chub, the big those.
Yeah.
But I buy
family
patties.
reunions.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so that's what they wanted, is that finely textured beef product was at a low enough price point that it really worked there. And then it also was beneficial to lower income purchasers. And so we then took some messaging around bringing back finely textured beef back to authority. The ultimate action is around the effective pricing of this product. And so while it may not be for you, and I'm not asking you guys to buy finely textured beef, but why should we let a safe product that is environmentally safe, why shouldn't we be allowed to make it available to the marketplace? Because it does work. And you both nodded and said, I don't know if you ever bought one of those chubs, but a family that is not the income level of us could probably feed themselves on that for a really long time. And it is high quality lean meat. And we should not let our biases impact that. So that's a perfect example of us walking through that journey, ultimately to action, which was a sales initiative or a leadership marketing initiative that we did to try to bring that product back into grocery stores. And now it's there. It's fully labeled, very transparent. You can see what you're getting, but we don't have to. Everybody doesn't have to buy their ground beef from Whole Foods. You can buy a chub at your Kroger and feed a bunch of Boy Scouts, and everybody's going to be okay, and you're going to do it economically.
Yeah,
that's an example of how we've used it with those guys.
That's a great one. So we've talked a lot about larger corporations and bigger businesses. Some of your clients that you've mentioned in here in your book are huge.
Yeah.
The smaller companies, like the mom and pops, who might not necessarily have a mission statement or might not have these core values in place. Do you have any suggestions for someone who's trying to develop those, how they can kind of figure out that center on the dartboard and aim for it? Yeah,
super simple. And I love that question. So thank you for asking it. I don't know about a mom and pop. I mean, if you're running a bodega and it's just, husband and wife, I don't know about the risk profile for those guys. But if you're a small business and you've got, 5 to 50 employees and you're really trying to, and you do something that the people might be confused about if they found out exactly how you did it or something like that. The simple solution I recommend is read the paper and say, if this had happened to us, what would we do? Because any given day in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, just pull out the headline. There's an article about what would we do, about how someone did something. And we ask ourselves at our weekly, monthly, quarterly staff meeting, what would we do if that happened to us? What would we do if protesters loitered our building? What would be our response? What would we say? And would we say this, or would we say that, or would we say anything? And so I think it is a great practice to take 10 minutes at a periodic staff meeting, whatever timeline you use, and just pull out the paper for the CEO and the leader to say, hey, Ryan and Mike, that just happened across town. What would happen if that happened to us? And you guys are like, I don't know. We've never even thought about that. That is incredible learning for the company. And that's the first steps to actually doing some of that mission and value work. Super simple.
I think that's great. Yeah, great advice. So we were talking earlier, sort of framed a lot of this conversation around the premise that people are coming to you mid-crisis. What about non-crisis reputation management? So, I mean, either people who are planning ahead and being prepared for these kind of situations, maybe using a technique like you just described, or, people who just, generally things are going pretty smooth, but, we still need to do our share of PR and make sure that people know who we are and what we stand for, that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of the non-crisis reputation management and what that looks like? Just, I think it might help take some of the sort of the fear off of this thing. It feels like, we're in crisis mode and we must deal. And maybe that's how a lot of people are feeling right now. But I feel like there's a lot of, time in our life when it hasn't been crisis time. And so I wonder if you just talk a little about that.
And just to contextualize that, the benefits is that, in a tight labor market, which is what we just came out of the past 10 years of a very tight labor market, is that you want to be the employer of choice. So the reason why you need to go on a reputation management journey is that, my insurance company versus the insurance company down the street, if I'm a high reputation firm and I've done some reputational activities, people want to work for me and I get to bring better talent. And so that's the benefit. That's the end game that's there. The way you do that is find out what are still the same process. What are our risks? Our risks are we need to get more talent. We need to get better educated talent. Our risks are, we're in a dangerous industry and people don't understand it. It's an understanding of how do we bolster what makes us great by understanding our mission and values, but how do we bolster what makes us great in the eyes of those that matter most to us? So in this insurance company I'm talking about, it is that we want more graduates from not that school, but we want them from that school. So how do we really attract those kids? So that's one way in order to do it. The other way and the other rationale is that you think about if you're a B2B business, is that it's really difficult, particularly if you're a supply chain B2B business, really difficult to compete on price because most everybody is margined everything down. And so the way companies now are making decision, purchasers are making decision is based on the reputation of a company. Hey, that's the company that helped the Little League, or hey, that's the company that did this in response to the hurricane, or that's the company that has that really innovative labor policy. So it's really solving from the same risk standpoint. What are our risks? What could impact us? And on a bright, sunshiny day, what can we do to help mitigate those? That begins the journey of growing your reputation. Not everybody can be Patagonia or Apple or Starbucks in that nirvana level, that hallowed ground that the three of those companies live in, Disney, for example. But we can really think about it. What's going to stop our business and what can we do instead of just throwing money at it, but what can we do to bolster our reputation to have other people help us with the challenges that we have to our business?
Yeah, actually, talking about reputation, I actually had in the notes to bring up the 7 layers of reputation. And I've got the diagram here. It's like transparency, responsible citizenship, leadership privilege, employee endorsement, product services, financial performance and strength, innovation and ideas. how do those all intertwine to kind of define your reputation?
It's awesome. So, without getting too nerdy on this, there's been a lot of academic research about what are I call them levers. What are the things that you can pull? But what are the aspects of a real reputation? Some research is 25, some research is 6, 7, everything in between. I settled on 7, and it's the 7 levers that you articulated there. I think the company, to Ryan's point, the company that just wants to grow its reputation should look at those 7 levers and identify 3 to 4 of them that we can really excel at. Okay, so leadership privilege is anchors the center of that. I think you need at least 3 or 4 of the 7 in order to grow your reputation. So leadership privilege would be a leader who demonstrates, the senior leader, CEO, demonstrates humility, demonstrates, a care and compassion, does video town hall meetings, talks to their team. And so the leadership is not a burden, but leadership is a privilege, that he or she has the honor of running this company. Not every CEO that you guys have come in contact with can pull that off. So we're not going to do that one. We're going to work on something else of the 7 levers. And so it is picking 3 to 4 of those 7 things. And another one is employee endorsement. Is we really want our employees when they write about us on Glassdoor or write about us in other places, we really want them to write good things. We really want to make sure that we're a financially good, financially strong company. We want to make sure that we're innovative and that we're solving people's problems before they even knew they had a problem. And so there's all 7 of them. I don't think you have to master all 7. I think you need to master 3 or 4. And I know great companies that are just really, really good at 3 of those 7. And they've got really, really strong reputations, but they're conscious about it. The big underlying premise to all of this, and we should have maybe started here, after that conversation with the CEO when I was flying home from New York and wrote the 4 A's, is that I thought about the American corporation or any corporation, and you guys are very familiar with this. Every corporation that works has a process. They've got a process for something, whether it's the legal process, the onboarding process, the way you make the hamburgers, the way you clean the bathroom. There's a process. All right. There's a system. There's an approval process. Reputation is complicated and complex, and that underlined some of your questions is that it's complex, but it deserves a process as well. And we can create a process that works. And that's what I'm trying to offer with the 4 A's, is a process no different than an HR process, a legal process, a manufacturing process, is that you can manage it the same way. And the 7 levers and the 4 A's all fit together to actually sort of bring that to life in a non-crisis context.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if we could take that stuff a little, maybe half a step further and get a tad more granular. And the part I want to explore is maybe more as we make its transition into sort of active marketing and maybe the usage of paid resources and things like that, where, we're running ads or one topic that you talk about quite a bit in the book is influencer marketing, for example, and finding your audience and finding your influencers. Can you talk a little bit about sort of leveraging these different tactics for our for the reputation of our for managing our reputation, but also can you talk about authenticity? Like when you're paying for an ad, is it still authentic? That kind of thing. Can you talk about some of these just different dichotomies that happen when you leverage these different tactics to achieve an end?
Yeah, and so it's as my hunch is, Ryan, and I would love to have a conversation with you about this from your experience. It's an advanced level play. Okay, you can't all of a sudden start doing how great are I reputation ads if you haven't really built a solid foundation about your products and services. Okay, so you got to talk about features and benefits, good old fashioned brand stuff about what are the features and benefits and the promise of our product. This widget's going to do this or that. And you can do that on lots of different venues. You can do that on influencer marketing. You can do that on social, paid, broadcast, whatever the case may be. Unless you have that foundation to take that advanced level to evangelize about the why of our product, the stuff Simon Sinek talks about, to evangelize about that stuff from the get-go would be a big mistake. But you can do it. You can do it, but what you have to make sure that you're ready to move to that master's level of communications. And it's okay. And you look at the Sunday morning shows, or you look at any sort of brand building advertising campaign, talking about Walmart does great work on this. All right. Walmart spends a ton of money so that everybody knows who Walmart is, but they also spend a lot of money talking about what they're doing for their team, to particular audiences, what they're doing in solar power. And so it's really niche and targeted advertising that can be done. It has to be done after you've done your basic blocking and tackling, and people know and understand who you are. But I firmly believe that if you can get to that why, it is really much more important than just the simple basics of features and benefits. But it's a process. You can't jump there. I don't know if you agree with that. If you could take one of your clients to jump there, it'd probably be stark and viewed as very, very inauthentic if you start there.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good point, because there are so many people that feel like they can just kind of throw money at problems and circumvent some kind of issue or get around some kind of reputation or maybe speed up the game a little bit. Yep. But I think generally speaking, the process just kind of is the process. Like, you just have to put in the time. You just have to have the time served and the depth of content or whatever it is that sort of illustrates that this is who you are, in order for it to begin to ring authentic. It's funny. One of the things that keeps happening now during COVID, especially, and my kids keep pointing this out to me, which I think is hilarious. They're fed up, just out of their mind, with commercials starting out like, in these times, this kind of stuff. And, and it comes off feeling a little bit desperate or kind of maybe a little bit gross, because it's like, yes, we're all in this. We get it. So like, go ahead and talk about something else. Like, you trying to take this role that maybe you're our savior in this situation or something feels a little gross. Yeah. And so it's funny, because even for my kids, and maybe I've raised them to be a little bit this way, they're, a little bit critical of that. But as an extension of that, and just speaking about critics and things like that, it's a section you have in the book, because you're talking about sort of the people who are expressing their opinions on your product or service, and they're being critical of what you're doing, for good or for bad. And but one thing I wanted to talk about as it pertains to reputation management is, like, when should we pay attention? So, I mean, some people are just trolls or just naysayers, and they're just going to kind of throw stuff out, and, maybe it'll stick, maybe it won't. Or maybe they'll try and, lead the comments on a YouTube video or something in a particular direction and see if they can kind of, stoke a fire or fuel problems. But at what point do we need to even pay attention to that stuff? Because I feel like it'd be really easy, especially as a corporation, you see so many of these companies leaping into action over one or two bad tweets or one or two bad emails or whatever it is. When the grand scheme of things, their other million customers don't really care. It's just this one voice that they're responding to. So as somebody's assessing risk and assessing, our situation in terms of reputation management, when do we start to pay attention to these messages, that are being critical?
Yeah, fabulous question. And a lot of our clients really, really struggle with that. A couple of things, the way I think about it. I think about it, and to reframe the question, is sort of this 80-20 construct. Is that what, and I use this sentence, what would reasonable people expect a reasonable company to do at a time like this? And so if you focus on reasonable people and know that you're a reasonable company, don't believe that what the trolls are saying, that that you did this or you intended to do this for really a good reason, strategic, preventable, or otherwise. We did it on purpose. What would the 80% expect? What would reasonable people expect of us? And really try to focus on that and really talk to those people. The problem is, those people that are happy and satisfied rarely give you good feedback. They don't have any need to give you feedback because they're really happy. And so having the discipline of knowing your mission and values is that we're a reasonable company. We're doing the right thing for the right reasons. It's right for the people that matter most. And so that's the last element to this, is that if those critiques and criticisms on social, YouTube video, your example, if they start influencing people that matter most, that's when I would think about reacting, but not simply just because they say something. To do that, it fits with awareness. And a part of that awareness journey is, who are the influencers, or who are the personas, the demographics of groups that really matter most. And if that starts creeping into their mind's eye, then I would think about responding. But if I go into the biases, I'm going to focus on the 80, because I am a reasonable company and I'm focusing on what reasonable people expect me to do. And I know who matters to me. And if they start touching the crown jewels, and if they start touching the things that really matter at my DNA core, then I'm going to be forced to react. But if it's just chatter, I'm chasing idiots, and it's not really worth the calories.
Yeah.
Do you think? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I would almost say that sometimes replying to that minutia and the idiots and the chatter actually fans the fire and causes
Totally.
more problems.
They want attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it seems like so much of this, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this. It's come up a little bit in the last few shows that we've taped. This idea of sort of pattern recognition, and so much of understanding how we move forward or how we react to a certain situation, sort of lies in this ability to recognize what's actually happening. And part of it, I think we have to live these experiences so that you understand, what does actual critical stuff look like versus things that are maybe just somebody trolling you. But can you talk a little bit about just sort of the importance of pattern recognition in, as it pertains to relationship management?
Yeah, I love it. So
management,
we talk about it in the context of smoke versus fire. How do you tell smoke versus fire? And it's hard from far away. You can't really tell far away. So you got to get close. You got to look at it and sort of see, okay, that's fire. That's just smoke. The way you think about it. One of the things that we're always advising our companies is learn from the past. So that great example, Mike, you asked about what's that simple thing that a company can do? Ask a question. What if this had happened to us? That begins to build your pattern recognition. That begins to build your muscle memory of, hey, you remember when we talked about that? And then we can say a square happened, a circle happened, and then a triangle. And now I see a square and a circle. I'm really confident it's going to be a triangle next. So you start seeing those patterns. And that's what I try to teach our clients, but that's what we do so well is really looking around corners and seeing that pattern recognition, is that understanding when an influencer does this, or when there's a New York Times article here, or someone says something, I'm pretty confident of what's going to happen next. And even in a crazy social media context, you can typically predict. But the way you do that is by having the discipline as a company, small company as well, to say, what if this had happened to us? And you start seeing those patterns. And you start seeing and being curious about the way the public, represented by the media, the way they start responding to things. All stories have an arc, have a beginning and end. And as long as we can understand that and you become an observer of that. So the best way to anybody to learn pattern recognition is to pay attention to the patterns. And that's comes with time, and it comes with, we think crisis simulations are a way you can actually experiment with that. And we do a lot of crisis simulations with our client to try to accelerate sort of a little shot to the forearm of what it looks like to be in a crisis. And then people can actually sort of accelerate their pattern recognition.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Well, Bill, we're almost at that time. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you and how they can reach out if they have questions, and where they can get a copy of your book?
Absolutely. So our website is kith.co, kith.co. Really active on LinkedIn. I try to publish something there at least once a week talking about these issues of crisis, reputation management, and risk. And then our Twitter feed is just B Colleti, BCOLETTI. And those are my three main channels that I work on. The website, you can get obviously email and whatnot, and you can message us there. But those are LinkedIn and Twitter are the two places, and then our website that we hang out and spend most of our time. You can get the book off the website. You can get the book at Amazon, or you can get the book off of the criticalmomentsbook.com website.
It's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate your time and insight on all this stuff. Is really great. Also, not bad for an inaugural episode of Between Two Palms. So that's pretty exciting.
I kept on trying to center myself in the conversation.
No, that's great. So thank you so much, Bill. We really appreciate your time, and especially taking it out of vacation to give us a shout. We're really grateful for you.
It's my pleasure. Love what you guys do. Keep doing it, and thank you for sharing and being committed to a podcast to share great ideas. So thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much to everybody who listens to the show every week. Feel free to share it. Tell your mom, tell your friends, and we'll see you all next week.